What is a man's legacy? For tech billionaire Ethan Sterling, it was the $50 billion empire he'd built from nothing, housed in a shimmering glass tower that pierced the clouds. It was a world of cold data, ruthless negotiations, and silent, staggering success. He had everything, and he felt nothing. But on a Tuesday morning, just as he was about to sign the deal that would immortalize his name in financial history, a single phone call from a ghost of his past shattered his sterile world. It was his ex-wife, her voice a tremor of desperation, with a demand that would cost him more than any deal. "Our son is dying, Ethan. Only your blood can save him." The air in the penthouse boardroom atop Sterling Tower was worth more per cubic foot than most people's homes. It was filtered, chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and hummed with the silent energy of immense wealth. Ethan Sterling, the architect of it all, stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, his gaze fixed not on the sprawling metropolis below, but on the reflection staring back at him. The man in the glass was sharp, impeccably dressed in a custom Tom Ford suit, his jaw set, his eyes the color of slate. He was the king of this kingdom, a monarch of code and capital. Today was his coronation. "The Hayashi delegation has entered the lobby, Mr. Sterling," said Marcus Thorne, his ever-present chief operating officer. Marcus was a man perpetually coiled with nervous energy, a brilliant strategist who translated Ethan's cold visions into executable plans. "They're 5 minutes away from cementing your legacy." Ethan gave a curt nod, his mind already cycling through the final clauses of the Hayashi Corp merger. This wasn't just a deal. It was an acquisition that would swallow his largest competitor and create a global tech behemoth. It was the culmination of a decade of sleepless nights, sacrificed relationships, and a single-minded pursuit of victory that had left little room for anything else. His fiancée, Isabelle Dubois, a woman as polished and curated as his art collection, had called it his masterpiece. He turned from the window, his face an unreadable mask of corporate control. "Have the final papers been brought up, Marcus?" "Signed, sealed, and waiting for your ink." "It's a flawless deal, Ethan." "Flawless." As Marcus spoke, the private line on Ethan's desk, a phone that only a handful of people had the number for, began to buzz. It was a low, insistent hum, an unwelcome disruption to the perfectly orchestrated symphony of the day. Ethan's brow furrowed. No one used that line. Not on a day like this. He almost ignored it, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "Let it go to voicemail," he said, his voice flat. "It's the 4th time it's called in 10 minutes, Marcus noted, his own anxiety spiking. Protocol is to not interrupt the final moments of a $50 billion negotiation," Ethan snapped. But the buzzing continued, a mosquito in the sterile room. Something, a long, dormant instinct, pricked at him. With a sigh of controlled exasperation, he strode to the desk and snatched the receiver. "This had better be life or death," he said, his voice clipped and cold. For a moment there was only the sound of shaky, ragged breathing on the other end, then a voice he hadn't heard in 8 years, a voice that belonged to a different life, a different man. "Ethan?" Chloe, his ex-wife. The name alone felt like a foreign object in his mouth. Chloe Reynolds, the art teacher with paint perpetually under her fingernails and a laugh that used to fill a small, cluttered apartment he could barely remember. His posture stiffened. "Chloe, how did you get this number?" "I still have a few contacts from the old days," and she said, her voice thin, stripped of its former warmth. There was no time for niceties, no pretense of catching up. "I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't—" Her voice broke, and Ethan could hear the dam of her composure cracking. "If it wasn't what?" he asked, a strange, cold dread starting to seep into the room, more chilling than the air conditioning. He saw Marcus shift his weight, his eyes darting between Ethan and the door, where the Japanese delegation would soon appear. "It's Leo," she choked out. The name hit him like a physical blow. Leo, his son, a boy he knew more through quarterly child support payments and the occasional sterile, forwarded photograph than through any actual memory. A boy he hadn't seen since he was a toddler. Guilt, an emotion Ethan had long ago classified as inefficient and buried deep, clawed its way into his throat. What about him? Is he all right? A sob, raw and unrestrained, tore through the phone line. No, Ethan. He's not all right. He's sick. He's very, very sick. She took a deep, shuddering breath. He has severe aplastic anemia. His bone marrow, it's failing. He's not making new blood cells. The doctors, they've tried everything. Treatments, medicines, nothing is working. Ethan sank into his leather chair, the fabric creaking in the sudden silence of the room. Aplastic anemia. The words were clinical, meaningless. He was a man of data, of assets and liabilities. This was a variable he couldn't compute. What does he need? Ethan asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. Money? The best doctors? I can fly him anywhere in the world. Name it. It was his default solution, the only one he knew. A problem was just a purchase he hadn't made yet. You can't buy this, Ethan, Chloe whispered, her desperation turning into a razor's edge. He needs a bone marrow transplant. It's his only chance. We've tested everyone. Me, my family, no one is a match. The National Registry has come up empty. It's a rare haplotype. The doctors said the best chance, the only chance, is a direct biological parent. The air left Ethan's lungs. He looked at his hands, the hands that signed billion-dollar checks and manipulated markets. He tried to picture Leo, to conjure an image of his son's face, but all he could see was a faded photo of a chubby-cheeked toddler. Chloe's voice was now a raw plea, stripped of all pride. I know what I'm asking. I know it's been years. But he's your son, Ethan. He's dying, and the doctor just told me, only your blood can save him. The world tilted on its axis. The Hayashi deal, the $50 billion, the legacy etched in stock tickers and headlines. It all dissolved into meaningless noise. The reflection in the window was no longer a king, but a hollow man. In that instant, a biological imperative, a primal instinct he thought he'd coded out of his own system, surged through him with the force of a tidal wave. Where are you? He demanded, his voice a low growl. St. Jude's Children's Hospital, Pediatric Oncology Ward, 4th floor. Marcus stepped forward, his face pale. Mr. Sterling, the delegation, they're here. Ethan didn't hear him. He looked past Marcus, past the waiting signatures and the life he had so meticulously constructed. All he could see was a hospital ward and a little boy he didn't know, whose life depended on him. He slammed the phone down. He stood up, the chair scraping violently against the marble floor. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the portfolio that represented his life's work. He ran. He ran without his suit jacket, the one that cost more than a car. He ran without the briefcase containing the final terms of the deal. He ran without his phone, his wallet, or his keys, leaving them on the polished surface of his desk like relics of a former life. He ran without a single word of explanation to the stunned executives in his wake. He ran without a second thought for the $50 billion empire that was, in the space of a single heartbeat, crumbling behind him. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into another dimension. The silent, wood-paneled box that usually carried him to his throne was now a cage, trapping him with the ghost of his past and the terrifying specter of his future. When the doors opened onto the pristine lobby, the Hayashi delegation was standing there, a group of immaculate Japanese businessmen led by the legendary Mr. Tanaka himself. They bowed in unison. Ethan didn't break his stride. He blew past them like a storm front, ignoring their shocked expressions and Marcus's frantic, shouted apologies trailing behind him. He shoved through the heavy glass doors and out into the raw, unfiltered chaos of the city. The noise was a physical assault. The shriek of tires, the cacophony of horns, the roar of a world that didn't care about his crisis. He was a man who hadn't hailed his own cab in 15 years. He stood on the curb, disoriented, a general without his army. A yellow cab screeched to a halt in front of him, and he wrenched the door open, throwing himself inside. St. Jude's Children's Hospital, now, as fast as you can, he barked, the authority in his voice the only remnant of his usual self. The cabbie, a grizzled man with a seen-it-all slouch, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Sure thing, pal. You got cash? My machine's busted. Ethan's hand instinctively went to his pocket. Nothing. He'd left his wallet, his platinum cards, his entire identity on the desk in his glass tower. Panic, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, flared in his chest. No. Look, it's an emergency. I'll wire you the money. I'm Ethan Sterling. The cabbie snorted. Yeah, and I'm Santa Claus. No cash, no ride. Desperation made Ethan do something he hadn't done in decades. He pleaded, Please, my son. He's sick. I have to get there. He pulled the absurdly expensive Patek Philippe watch from his wrist. Take this. It's worth 100 times the fare. The driver's eyes widened at the glint of platinum and the sheer weight of the timepiece. He nodded slowly. Get in. Buckle up. The journey was a blur of traffic and self-recrimination. Every red light was a personal torment. Every car that cut them off was a thief stealing precious seconds. Ethan's mind raced, replaying the last 8 years. He had told himself it was for the best. Chloe had wanted a simple life. He had wanted an empire. They were incompatible. He paid his support, more than the court required, salving his conscience with money. He convinced himself the boy was better off without a father who was never there. A ghost in his own home. What a convenient, damning lie. He had built a legacy of steel and glass and code. But he had failed at the one legacy that was written in flesh and blood. The watch on the cabbie's dashboard was a testament to his success and a symbol of his failure. He could buy time, but he couldn't get it back. When the cab finally pulled up to the hospital entrance, Ethan threw the door open before it had fully stopped. Keep the watch, he grunted, and sprinted toward the building. The hospital was another world. The smell, a sterile, cloying mix of antiseptic, floor wax, and something indefinably sad, hit him first. The hushed tones, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant rhythmic beeping of machinery. It was the antithesis of his sharp, loud, decisive world. He felt like an intruder, his expensive, now rumpled suit a glaring symbol of his otherness. He found the directory and navigated to the pediatric oncology ward on the 4th floor. The walls here were painted with cheerful murals of cartoon animals and smiling suns, a desperate, heartbreaking attempt to mask the grim reality of the place. He saw children with no hair, pulling IV drips behind them like reluctant pets. He saw parents with eyes hollowed out by fear and exhaustion. He saw Chloe. She was standing at the end of the hall, leaning against a wall, her arms wrapped around herself. The years had changed her. The vibrant, laughing girl he remembered was gone, replaced by a woman whose face was etched with a profound weariness. She was thinner, and her auburn hair, once a wild mane, was pulled back in a severe functional ponytail. When she saw him, her expression wasn't one of relief, but a complex mask of resentment, fear, and a desperate, unwilling hope. Ethan, she said, her voice flat. Chloe, I came as fast as I could. The words felt inadequate, pathetic. They're prepping him now, she said, not looking at him, her gaze fixed on a closed door down the hall. They need to take your blood, run the final compatibility tests. It takes a few hours. Before Ethan could respond, a man approached Chloe from behind, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He was of average height, with a kind, open face and dark hair, lightly peppered with gray at the temples. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, and he looked at Chloe with an intimacy and concern that sent a jolt of pure, irrational jealousy through Ethan. Chloe, honey, did you get some water? The man asked softly, before his eyes fell on Ethan. He extended a hand, his expression polite but guarded. You must be Ethan. I'm David Chen. Ethan took the offered hand. The handshake was firm, steady. This was David, Chloe's husband, the man who had been raising his son, the man who had likely been there for the fevers, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories, all the things Ethan had outsourced. David, Ethan acknowledged, his voice tight. Thank you for being here. David's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He's my son too, Ethan, in every way that matters. The words weren't an attack, but a simple statement of fact, and they hit Ethan harder than any accusation. I need to see him, Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. Chloe finally looked at him, and her eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless pain. He's weak, Ethan. He doesn't, he doesn't know you. We told him a man who helped make him is coming, a special man who can help him get better. Please, just don't overwhelm him." She led the way to the room. Peering through the small glass window in the door, Ethan's carefully constructed world finally and completely shattered. There, in a hospital bed that seemed far too large for him, was a small, frail boy. His skin was unnervingly pale, almost translucent, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. A thicket of tubes and wires connected him to a host of beeping, whirring machines. His dark hair, the same color as Ethan's, was thin and patchy. He wasn't a photograph. He wasn't a quarterly payment. He was real, and he was fading. The immense, crushing weight of his failure as a father descended on Ethan. He had conquered the world, but he had abandoned this small, fragile island. He had let another man build the bridges, tend the shores, and now, as the island was about to be swept away by the sea, he had been summoned as a last resort. He was here to save the son he had never known, and he had a terrifying feeling that he was already 8 years too late. A nurse with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor led Ethan to a small, sterile room. "Mr. Sterling, I'm just going to draw some blood for the HLA typing. Dr. Sharma will be in to speak with you afterwards." Ethan rolled up his sleeve, exposing an arm that hadn't seen a needle for anything other than a flu shot in years. As the needle slid in, he didn't flinch. The small prick was nothing compared to the gaping wound that had opened in his soul. He watched his own dark red blood fill the vial, the very substance that supposedly held the key to his son's life. It looked so ordinary. He felt a flicker of a feeling he couldn't name, a desperate, primal connection to the boy in the other room. For the first time, he felt like a father. He was escorted to a small, bleak waiting room reserved for families. Chloe and David were already there, sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs under the harsh fluorescent lights. The silence between the three of them was a living entity, thick with unspoken history and resentment. David held Chloe's hand, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles in a gesture of simple, profound comfort that Ethan could only watch with a tightening in his chest. His pocket vibrated. He instinctively reached for it before remembering he'd left his phone behind. The vibration was coming from his suit pants. A burner phone Marcus had insisted he carry for emergencies, one he'd completely forgotten about. He pulled it out. The screen was lit up with a dozen missed calls and a string of frantic text messages from Marcus. "Deal is stalling. Tanaka is insulted. Call me." "Ethan, where are you?" The board is in full-blown panic. "Stock is down 4%. This is a disaster. What do I tell them?" "Ethan, for God's sake, answer me. Your legacy is imploding." Ethan stared at the words. Legacy. The word seemed absurd now. He looked through the doorway of the waiting room, down the hall towards Leo's room. That was his legacy, a legacy he was about to lose before he'd even had a chance to claim it. He switched the phone off and shoved it deep into his pocket, the vibration ceasing. Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway, casting a long shadow. It was Isabelle Dubois, his fiancée. She stood there, a vision of impossible glamour in the drab hospital corridor. She wore a Chanel suit and stiletto heels that clicked sharply on the linoleum, a stark, jarring contrast to the hushed grief of the ward. She was holding his phone and wallet. "Ethan, darling," she said, her voice a carefully modulated whisper that still managed to sound loud. "I had your driver track your cab. I was so worried. Marcus is losing his mind. What on earth is going on?" Her eyes swept over the room, taking in the peeling paint, the worn-out chairs, and landing on Chloe with a look of cool assessment. Chloe stiffened, pulling her hand away from David's. "Isabel, not now," Ethan said, his voice low and strained. "Not now. Ethan, the Hayashi merger is collapsing as we speak. This is everything you've worked for." She stepped closer, her expensive perfume warring with the antiseptic smell of the hospital. She saw the state of his suit, his disheveled appearance. "My God, look at you. What has she done to you?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain as she glanced at Chloe. "She has done nothing," David said, standing up. His voice was quiet but firm, a protective wall around Chloe. "We're here for our son." Isabel let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Your son? Ethan, what is he talking about? The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of a woman in a white coat. She had a kind but serious face, and she held a tablet in her hands. Mr. Sterling? Ms. Reynolds? I'm Dr. Anya Sharma. Everyone fell silent. The tension in the room shifted, focusing entirely on the doctor. This was the moment. I have the results of the preliminary compatibility screening, Dr. Sharma said, her professional gaze sweeping over them. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a surge of heroic purpose. This was it. The pain, the guilt, the chaos. It was all worth it. He was going to save his son. He was going to be the hero. Dr. Sharma's eyes landed on Ethan, and her expression was one he couldn't decipher. It wasn't relief. It was confusion, pity. There's an unexpected issue, she began, choosing her words with clinical care. We ran the test twice to be certain. The human leukocyte antigen markers are essential for a successful transplant. They're inherited directly from the biological parents, a unique set from each. And, Ethan urged, his patience gone, am I a match? Dr. Sharma took a deep breath. She looked from Ethan to Chloe, then back again. The silence stretched, thin and taut, ready to snap. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice gentle but devastatingly clear. According to the genetic markers in your blood, there is a 0% chance that you are Leo's biological father. The words hung in the air, unreal and monstrous. 0% chance. Ethan stared at her, his mind refusing to process the information. It was a bug in the system, a data error. It couldn't be right. He had run from the deal of a lifetime. He had abandoned his empire. He had found his purpose in saving his son. He turned to Chloe, a storm of confusion and fury gathering in his eyes. What is she talking about? Chloe, tell her she's wrong. Chloe's face had gone utterly white, her expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. She stared at the doctor, then at Ethan, her mouth opening and closing silently. David put a protective arm around her, his own face a mask of bewilderment. Isabel let out a gasp, a sound of theatrical shock mixed with a strange, vindicated triumph. Oh my God, she whispered, looking at Chloe with newfound contempt. So this was all a lie? A shakedown? No, Chloe finally whispered, her voice a thread. No, it can't be. Dr. Sharma looked on with professional sympathy. The science is unequivocal, Ms. Reynolds. I'm so sorry. I know this is a shock, but we need to face the reality of the situation. Leo is still in critical condition, and his biological father is our only remaining hope. We need to find him, immediately. The room began to spin around Ethan. The carefully constructed narrative of his dramatic, sacrificial return had just been obliterated. He wasn't the reluctant hero swooping in to save the day. He was a fool, a stranger, an irrelevant variable in an equation he never should have been a part of. He had run from his real life, his real legacy, for a fantasy, a lie. The foundation of his past, present, and the future he had just begun to imagine crumbled into dust, leaving him standing in the rubble, a billionaire with nothing, a father to no one. The terrible truth wasn't just that he couldn't save Leo, it was that he had no right to even try. The silence that followed Dr. Sharma's bombshell was more violent than any shout. It was a vacuum, sucking the air and the life from the small waiting room. Ethan's mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculation, was a ruin. The single, unassailable fact, 0% chance, was a wrecking ball that had demolished everything. He turned on Chloe, his voice low and shaking with a toxic brew of rage and betrayal. A lie? Was this whole thing a lie? 8 years, Chloe. You let me believe for 8 years. No, I didn't know, she cried, her own shock finally giving way to a torrent of tears. She shrank back against David, her face crumbling. I never thought. You never thought? Ethan's laugh was a harsh, ugly sound. How could you not think? This isn't a rounding error. This is a simple question of who you were with. Who was it, Chloe? David stepped between them, his posture defensive, but his voice calm. Ethan, this isn't the time or the place. This is exactly the time and the place, Ethan roared, the sound echoing down the quiet hospital corridor, causing a passing nurse to stare. That boy in there is running out of time because she lied. Who was it? He directed his fury back at Chloe, his words like stones. Who is his father? Isabel, who had been watching the scene with a morbid fascination, stepped forward and placed a hand on Ethan's arm. Ethan, darling, let's go. This is pathetic. She used you. It's over. Your real life is waiting for you. Ethan shook her off, his eyes still locked on Chloe. The sight of his sophisticated fiancée trying to pull him away from this raw, messy tragedy only fueled his sense of dislocation. He felt trapped between two worlds, belonging to neither. Chloe, pushed to her breaking point, finally broke. Her confession came out in a flood of shame and long-buried pain, her words tumbling over each other. It was after that horrible fight, she sobbed, not looking at anyone. Do you remember, Ethan? The night you closed the Stratosphere deal? You were supposed to come home to celebrate our anniversary. You never showed up. You didn't even call until 2 a.m. You said the deal was your legacy, that it was more important. Ethan flinched. He remembered. Vaguely. It was a footnote in a long history of prioritized work. I was so alone, Chloe continued, her voice thick with misery. I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. I went for a drink with some colleagues from the school. There was this man, Mark, a substitute art teacher. He was kind. He listened. It was one night, Ethan. Just one stupid, lonely, meaningless night. I regretted it the second it was over. I was so ashamed. She finally looked up, her eyes pleading. When I found out I was pregnant a few weeks later, I was terrified. But I was also relieved. I thought it was a sign, a chance for us to fix things. I pushed that one night so far down, I convinced myself it couldn't have been him. I wanted it to be you. So badly, I made it true in my own head. I am so sorry. The confession hung in the air, pathetic and human. It wasn't a malicious, calculated scheme. It was a story of loneliness and desperate hope. But for Ethan, the reason didn't matter. The result was the same. He was an outsider, a fraud. His rage deflated, replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness. He had been offered a chance at redemption, a purpose beyond balance sheets and stock prices, and it had been snatched away because it was never his to begin with. Dr. Sharma, who had waited with professional patience, cleared her throat gently. Miss Reynolds, Chloe, we don't have time for this. This man, Mark, do you know his full name? Where he is now? Chloe shook her head helplessly. Mark, I don't even remember his last name. He left the school district a month later. He said he was moving back home. Somewhere in Oregon, I think. I have no idea how to find him. A wave of despair washed over the room. Finding a Mark, who was a substitute teacher in the city 9 years ago and might have moved to Oregon, was a needle in a continent-sized haystack. Every second they wasted, Leo's chances diminished. Just then, the burner phone in Ethan's pocket buzzed again. He ignored it, but it buzzed again and again with an unnerving persistence. Finally, numbly, he pulled it out. It was Marcus. He answered, his voice a monotone. What? Marcus's voice was strained, panicked. Ethan, it's over. Hayashi Corp just released a public statement. They're formally withdrawing their offer, citing leadership instability and erratic behavior. The market is reacting. We're in freefall. The board is calling an emergency meeting to discuss your removal as CEO. You've lost the company, Ethan. It's gone. Ethan stared at the linoleum floor. He had lost a son he never had, and now he had lost the empire he had built in his place. In the space of an hour, he had become a king with no kingdom and a father with no son. Isabel heard the gist of the call, her face hardening. She took a step back from him, as if his failure were contagious. It's done then, she said, her voice cold and final. You made your choice, Ethan. You chose this. She gestured around the bleak hospital room at the weeping ex-wife and her quiet, steadfast husband. I hope it was worth it. Without another word, she turned and her heels clicked away down the hall, the sound of his old life abandoning him completely. Ethan ended the call without responding to Marcus. He was adrift. He looked at Chloe, crumpled in David's arms. He looked at the door to Leo's room, behind which a little boy was fighting for his life, waiting for a father who wasn't him. There was nothing for him here. He wasn't the hero. He wasn't the villain. He was just irrelevant. Slowly, like a man twice his age, he turned and walked away. He pushed through the doors of the ward, past the cartoon animals on the walls, and into the anonymous corridor, a ghost in a hospital that held no place for him. Ethan walked out of the hospital and into a downpour. The sky had opened up, releasing a torrent of cold gray rain that matched the landscape of his soul. He had no coat, no car, no destination. He just walked, letting the rain soak his $1,000 suit, plastering his hair to his scalp, washing away the last vestiges of the man he was that morning. The city lights blurred into long neon streaks. The sounds of traffic were muted, distant. He was in a bubble of profound silence, the silence of absolute loss. Every step was heavy with the weight of his new reality. He was not a father. His company was in ruins. His fiancée was gone. The entire architecture of his identity had been razed to the ground. He walked for miles, aimless and empty, until he found himself in a part of the city he hadn't seen in years. It was a neighborhood of brick-faced buildings and small family-owned shops. He stumbled into a 24-hour diner, the bell above the door jangling weakly. The place smelled of old coffee and frying onions. He slid into a cracked vinyl booth, dripping water onto the floor. A waitress with a weary face and a kind smile brought him a menu he didn't read. He just sat there staring at the condensation on the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. At the next table, a family was finishing their meal, a father, a mother, and two young kids bickering over a milkshake. The father, a man in a paint-splattered work shirt, ruffled his son's hair and laughed, a sound of simple, uncomplicated joy. Ethan watched them, an ache spreading through his chest. That was a legacy. Not a name on a building, not a number in a bank account. It was that laugh. It was the easy touch, the shared milkshake, the messy, beautiful, ordinary business of being a family. His mind flashed back to the hospital, to the image of Leo, small and pale in that oversized bed, to the desperation in Chloe's eyes, to the quiet strength of David, the man who had earned the right to be called a father. And then, a thought, clear and sharp, cut through the fog of his despair. Why did I run? He hadn't run because of a biological obligation. He didn't even know the boy. He ran because, for the first time in a decade, a human need, a desperate plea for help, had pierced the armor of his ambition. He ran because the call of a child in peril resonated with something deeper inside him than the call of any business deal. He had felt the pull of fatherhood, a powerful instinctual drive to protect. Did the biological test results invalidate that feeling? Did it make the boy's suffering any less real? Did it absolve him of all responsibility? He had told Chloe years ago that the company was his legacy, and today, when faced with a choice, he had abandoned that legacy without a second thought to answer a different call. The biology might have been a lie, but his own instinct, his gut reaction, was the truest thing he had felt in years. He had failed Leo from birth by being an absent father. Chloe had failed him with a secret. The universe had failed him with a cruel twist of genetics. But the boy was still dying. And he, Ethan Sterling, the man who could move mountains with a phone call, was sitting in a diner, feeling sorry for himself. A new feeling began to displace the emptiness. Not rage, not guilt, but a cold, hard resolve. He wasn't Leo's biological father. Fine. That door was closed. But he was Ethan Sterling. He had built an empire from nothing. He commanded resources, networks, and a fortune that could bend reality to his will. He had been summoned to help, and he had failed the first test. But the battle wasn't over. He pulled out the burner phone. The battery was almost dead. He turned it on. One new message from Marcus, sent an hour ago. Board meeting in the morning. They're voting you out. It's over, Ethan. I'm sorry. Ethan's fingers moved swiftly across the keypad. He didn't call. He sent a text, his words precise and authoritative. The CEO reawakened, but with a new mission. Marcus, cancel the board meeting. Liquidate my personal holdings in SV Tech and Blue Reef Capital. All of them. Effective immediately. Wire the funds to a new account. I'll send details. The company is yours to run for now. Stop the bleeding. Save what you can. I have something more important to do. He hit send. It was an insane order, a fire sale of assets worth billions, an act of financial suicide. But it was also an act of liberation. He then sent a text to the number Isabel had called from. You were right. I made my choice. Goodbye. He stood up, leaving a puddle on the vinyl seat. He walked to the counter. I don't have any money, he told the waitress, his voice clear and steady for the first time all day. But I'm good for it. He walked back out into the rain, but this time he had a destination. He wasn't walking away from something anymore. He was walking toward it. He returned to the hospital, soaking wet and stripped of his empire, but more powerful than he had been that morning. He found Chloe and David in the same waiting room, looking defeated, poring over old yearbooks from her school, a hopeless task. They looked up as he entered, surprised to see him. Ethan, Chloe whispered, you came back. You were right, Chloe, he said, his voice calm and devoid of accusation. I failed him. From the day he was born, I was supposed to be his father, and I failed. The biology doesn't change that. He looked at both of them, his gaze unwavering. So I can't save him with my blood, but I can save him with everything else I have. You need to find a man named Mark who taught in this city 9 years ago and might live in Oregon. I can do better than that. He pulled out his phone. I'm going to launch the largest private donor drive this country has ever seen. I'm going to hire the best private investigators in the world to find this Mark. We won't just search the National Registry. We'll access every private and international registry on the planet, no matter the cost. We'll use my media contacts to get Leo's story on every news channel in the country. We will turn over the entire world until we find a match. Chloe and David stared at him, speechless. He may not be my son by blood, Ethan said, the conviction ringing in his voice, but his life is my responsibility. I'm going to save our boy. The next phase of Ethan Sterling's life began not in a boardroom, but in a small, sterile hospital consultation room that he swiftly and ruthlessly converted into a command center. This became his war room in the battle for Leo's life. The antiseptic white walls were soon covered with sprawling maps of North America, timelines and flowcharts drawn on portable whiteboards he'd had delivered. A bank of laptops hummed constantly, their screens filled with data streams, communication logs, and financial terminals. The air, once smelling only of disinfectant, was now thick with the aroma of strong, black coffee brewed around the clock. Ethan himself was transformed. The impeccably tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple dark sweater and trousers he'd had a courier purchase. He was unshaven, his eyes shadowed by exhaustion, but they burned with a terrifying intensity, a fire that had long been banked by corporate apathy. He hadn't slept in over 48 hours, fueled by caffeine and a singular, obsessive purpose. He was no longer the detached king, he was a field general, personally directing every detail of the campaign. His first calls were surgical strikes. He contacted a crisis PR firm, not one of his usual corporate choices, but a smaller, hungrier group known for their narrative-driven campaigns. This is not about me, he'd commanded over a secure line. My name stays out of it. The benefactor's anonymous. The hero of this story is the boy, Leo, his courage. Frame it as a call to the community, a search for one good person who can save a child. I want his story on every screen and in every paper by morning. Next, the private investigators. He set up a competitive triangulation, hiring 3 of the world's most elite firms. One was run by a meticulous ex-MI6 agent in London, another by a tech-savvy team in Silicon Valley, and the third by a grizzled, no-nonsense former FBI deputy director in New York named Sullivan. You have an unlimited budget and my complete authority, he told each of them separately. Your target is a man named Mark, a substitute art teacher in this city 9 years ago, who may have moved to Oregon. The first team to deliver a confirmed identity and location gets a $10 million bonus. I don't care about your methods, only your results. Finally, he tackled the medical establishment. He leveraged decades of corporate networking, calling in favors from CEOs of pharmaceutical giants and biotech VCs. He wasn't asking, he was demanding. We need access to the European Associated Donor Registry and the Asian Cord Blood Bank. Now, not in 6 months. I will underwrite the operational cost for the next quarter. Just give me access. Faced with the sudden promise of immense, no-strings-attached funding, bureaucratic walls that usually took years to climb crumbled in hours. Chloe and David watched this whirlwind with a mixture of shock and awe. The ghost from Chloe's past, the man she remembered as cold and distant, was now a human tempest, bending the world to his will for a child he barely knew. They became his ground team. Chloe spent hours with a forensic sketch artist from one of the PI firms, painstakingly trying to recall Mark's features. David became the logistical coordinator, liaising between the hospital staff and the flood of requests from Ethan's new army. The first 2 weeks were a grueling grind. The A Match for Leo campaign was a massive public success, and tips flooded in. Thousands of kind-hearted people registered as donors, but every lead on Mark the art teacher turned into a dead end. The investigators waded through mountains of data, school records, and DMV databases, but the name was too common, the trail too cold. For a moment, even Ethan felt a flicker of doubt. He had always believed that enough capital and willpower could solve any problem, but a human life wasn't a hostile takeover. What if this was the one problem money couldn't solve? During one long, bleak night, Marcus Thorne called. His voice was a mix of exhaustion and bewilderment. "Ethan, the bleeding has stopped. The emergency liquidation gave us the liquidity to weather the storm. The board is baffled. The story of the anonymous benefactor is starting to leak. They think you've lost your mind. Frankly," Marcus paused, "I'm starting to wonder if you finally found it. What's the endgame here?" Ethan looked through the glass of his war room at Chloe and David, huddled together over a lukewarm cup of tea in the waiting area, their faces etched with worry. "The endgame, Marcus," Ethan said softly, "is a fighting chance. Keep the ship afloat." Later that night, he brought fresh coffee to Chloe and David. The three of them sat in the quiet waiting room, the first time they had stopped moving in days. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was a shared space of exhaustion and hope. "He used to love finger painting," Chloe said suddenly, a faint smile touching her lips. "He'd get it all over his face. He said it was his battle paint." Ethan listened, a profound ache in his chest. These were the small, precious memories he had forfeited. He hadn't just been an absent father. He had been a thief, robbing himself of the simple joys that constituted a life. The breakthrough came on the 23rd day. The call was from Sullivan, the ex-FBI man. His voice was a low growl. "Mr. Sterling, we've got him." It wasn't Oregon. It was a long shot, a cross-reference of shared interest hobby forums from a decade ago. "Your man is Mark Peterson. He runs a hardware store in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Married, 2 daughters. We matched a partial fingerprint from an old teaching license application to a print he gave for a local business license. It's him." Ethan closed his eyes, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. It wasn't a feeling of triumph. It was a wave of pure, shuddering relief that almost brought him to his knees. "Is he aware?" "Not yet," Sullivan said. "Awaiting your instructions." Ethan's next moves were made with extreme care. He hired a medical liaison to make the approach, to explain the situation with sensitivity. He then went to find Chloe and David. He told them the news gently and watched as a storm of emotions crossed Chloe's face. Overwhelming relief for her son, tangled with the resurrected shame of a long-buried secret. David simply wrapped his arms around her, a silent, unwavering pillar of support. The wait for Mark Peterson's genetic test was the most exquisite torture Ethan had ever endured. When Dr. Sharma finally walked towards them, holding a tablet, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. She looked at the three of them, and for the first time in weeks, her professional demeanor was broken by a wide, genuine smile. "He's a perfect match," she announced, her voice filled with emotion. "A 10 out of 10. It's the best possible outcome. We can schedule the transplant for the end of the week." The collective exhale in the room was a physical force. Chloe dissolved into tears of joy, clinging to David. Then she turned to Ethan, her eyes shining. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "Oh God, Ethan, you actually did it." The day of the transplant was quiet and solemn. The precious bag of stem cells, a gift from a stranger in Wisconsin, was infused into Leo's small body. Now the waiting truly began. The long, anxious vigil to see if the new cells would take root, a process Dr. Sharma called engraftment. During that time, Ethan didn't leave. He saw the company stabilizing from afar, but his world had shrunk to the size of the pediatric oncology ward. The turning point came 10 days later. A nurse, checking the daily blood work, let out a small, excited gasp. "His neutrophil count," she said to Dr. Sharma, "it's up. Just a fraction, but it's the first time it's moved in the right direction." It was the first glimmer of dawn. From there, the good news came in a slow, steady trickle. Leo's energy returned. He asked for his video games. The true victory came one afternoon when he complained loudly that he was sick of hospital food and demanded a pepperoni pizza. One day, Ethan stood outside Leo's room watching. David was by the bed, reading from a comic book, doing all the voices. Leo, with a healthy pink flush on his cheeks and a fuzz of new hair on his head, was roaring with laughter. Chloe was sitting in a chair by the window, knitting, a look of pure, unadulterated peace on her face. It was a perfect portrait of a family, and Ethan felt no jealousy, only a profound sense of rightness. He was the architect of this scene, not a resident in it, and for the first time, that felt like more than enough. David saw him and motioned him in. "The superhero man is here," Leo announced, sitting up straighter. He looked at Ethan with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the man who found my magic medicine?" Ethan's throat tightened as he knelt by the bed. "I was on the search party, champ," he said softly. "But your mom and your dad right here, they were the team captains. They're the real superheroes." He looked up and met David's eyes, a universe of understanding passing between them. Later, as he was finally preparing to leave, David walked him to the elevator. The silence between them was comfortable, respectful. "You know," David said, breaking the silence, "for 8 years I think I resented the idea of you, the rich ghost who just paid the bills. I thought if you ever showed up, it would be about ego. I've never been more wrong about a person in my life. What you did here, it wasn't about money. You poured your entire soul into this." "He's a great kid," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "He deserved a fighting chance. You gave him a life, David. I cleared the path." Ethan shook his hand, a firm, final gesture of peace and mutual respect. Stepping out of the hospital and into the bright afternoon sun, he felt a lightness he hadn't known was possible. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "Welcome back, boss. The ship is steady. What's the first move?" Ethan looked at the message, then up at the vast open sky. He didn't reply. His world was bigger now. His legacy wasn't in a stock price or a skyscraper. It was in the sound of a child's laughter. It was in the quiet peace on a mother's face. It was a second chance, not just for Leo, but for him. He had run from his life to save a son who wasn't his, and in the process had finally, truly found his own. Ethan Sterling's story shows us that our true legacy is rarely what we plan. He started as a billionaire who had traded human connection for a glass tower, only to have his world shattered by a single phone call. He ran toward a duty that he thought was biological, but discovered a purpose that was purely a matter of choice. In losing a son he never had, he learned what it truly meant to be a father. His journey proves that family isn't always about blood. It's about showing up when it counts, and that redemption is found not in what we possess, but in what we are willing to sacrifice for others. What do you think truly defines a family? And what does it mean to build a legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.